Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with host Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
We thank our patrons again for supporting this podcast. Our patrons are the backbone of this podcast, and we are always grateful to you.
We are grateful. We are thankful. We appreciate what you do, and we appreciate the support you give us that enables us to reach out to so many others. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes. And if you would like to be a patron, go over to patreon.com/speakingout, and you will land on our page, and you can look at the benefits. One of the benefits, which is the subject of this topic, is our patrons at a certain level on up are receiving a free signed copy of my book, The Devil Inside, which releases February 16th.
Which is very soon, Jimmy.
It is very soon.
Away.
Yep.
Yes.
We're coming up in a few days, and I'm very excited about it. And it's been a grueling process in the midst of COVID. And you know, too, as an author, it's
not easy. It isn't.
Yeah. You don't sit down and just kick it out like our good friend Mary DeMuth. She's the only person I know of who can sit down and in like 2 weeks' time or 4 weeks or whatever, she can kick a book out. I know.
She has another book.
She's very disciplined.
Another book and another book.
She's incredibly disciplined. I have the utmost admiration and respect for Mary. And that's just it took me almost a year.
which is average, I think, to get a book out. Even that is a little bit, what do I want to say, better than average. It's hard to collect your thoughts and get what's inside outside on paper.
It is. Yeah, and it was, just an emotionally exhausting book to write. It brought up a lot of stuff as I was writing, which, in my opinion, was a good thing. It really helped the content and the writing process.
Yeah, it does.
It helps draw those emotions out that, it's not just writing words down. You're actually pouring your emotions on the paper.
You're feeling it and you're reliving it. And when you relive trauma, that is never easy. But you did an amazing job, which... I'd like to put you on the hot seat today.
Yeah,
Jimmy.
Let's do it.
I think today we're going to do something a little bit different and use this time together to talk about the book that Jimmy has written. Jimmy actually gave me a copy of the manuscript to read just recently. I had no input as far as his writing into the book, so I was a reader just like you will be, and I'm telling you, I sat and could not put the manuscript down. It was that powerful, that good, and I think our listeners are going to feel the same way. With that, as our introduction to this, I'd like to ask you a few questions, if I can.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, I noticed that, first off, you spent a lot of time talking about detail after detail of your childhood. Mm-hmm. And I wondered at first, of course I knew at the end of the book why, but why did you do that? Why did you spend so much time doing that?
Yeah, I really wanted to show people that... our childhood was really normal. From inside of my own skin, so to speak, looking back, none of us knew that he was an abuser, and by all intents and purposes, we had a very normal, happy upbringing.
Actually, I'll interject something. I found myself laughing out loud at some
I did put some goofy stuff in there.
at some of the things that you did as kids, and on the other hand, I found myself wanting to yell a little bit too. But go ahead, yeah.
Well, maybe it made you realize that sending us outside for hours and hours unsupervised wasn't the best
No, probably not.
parenting method, but we survived, and we all made it out alive. So, yeah, it was interesting because at first the chapter on the childhood was going to be just kind of like a side note, and then my publisher, the owner of the publishing company himself, he had read the manuscript, and he came back and he had some feedback, as well as my editor, and he said, I really want to know what it was like to be inside of your home. He's like, because he said, I know your story, but a lot of people who are reading this have no idea what your story is, except that you're some preacher out there somewhere who reported your dad, and now he's in prison. He's like, I wanted that feel of what it was like being inside of the home. So I wrote the chapter that kind of invites the reader to sit alongside of us inside the home, and so you feel that joy, and I think as you read it, you can actually feel the excitement that we felt in the home, and just being carefree and goofy, and us sitting in the station wagon singing that dumb jingle. And if any of you people who have ever bought an Oldsmobile, you'll know this song. There is a special feel in an Oldsmobile. It's that Oldsmobile jingle, and it was this cassette tape that came with that ugly wood paneled station wagon, and we would. Like, even as kids, we thought that song was so ridiculous and over the top. And we would just to be goofy, we would sing that out. But Dad would drive us around, and where some parents would freak out and, not want to be embarrassed or tell us to shut up and sit back. Yeah. Like, he would roll the windows down and let us hang our heads out the window and sing that jingle. And he was like, he just let us feel like kids. Nothing in the world mattered except for us. Right. And that was the sense that I wanted to give people that before I transitioned.
Right. You did an amazing job with that, Jimmy. As your mother, so many memories flooded back to me of just happy, fun, loving kids.
Life was great as a kid.
And you explained it well, and you were so right. Your dad was in the mix of it all. Mm-hmm. He was with you kids constantly. Yeah. And he was the huge part of that joy. I was the stern one, the one who would rein everybody in, including your dad. Mm-hmm. I'd have to rein him in. He was my biggest kid. But you kids have so many fun memories to share, and you did an amazing job with presenting why later on life was so difficult when you found out what you did about your dad.
Yeah, that was the point I wanted to make too. That this it wasn't like we had this really upsetting, awful childhood that was like we walked on eggshells as kids and because that would have made sense when we found out that Dad was an abuser.
Right.
We could have looked back and been like, oh, of course. But it wasn't that way. It was, a huge part of the trauma with all of our story is that we had a great home life.
Well, your relationship, the relationships within the home were wonderful. Yeah. I appreciated so much you sharing moments of holidays together, of just average days, meal times. Everything was fun. It just was. Yeah. And your dad was in the middle of the mix of it all. Mm-hmm. So moving on a little bit, and by the way, I think the readers will get pulled into that, Jimmy, that so much so, every detail, just you can feel the excitement that you had as a kid.
And they'll learn about my little naughty side.
That's okay. Yeah. I learned a few things about you too. That after this, I'll chastise you a bit.
Yeah, I was going to say there's not much you can do about it now. So I felt like
but,
after 40 years, it was safe to write about some of the little bad things that we did.
I just kind of sucked my breath in a couple times with the three-wheelers and all. The book is not just an emotional tug-at-the-heart book. It's also an educational book. I found it to be extremely educational. If you had to choose just one major takeaway that people got from the book, what would that be?
Yeah, I think two takeaways. One is that abuse is unstoppable. In fact, I began the book that way. I used a story from here in Pennsylvania, and I won't spoil that for the readers, but you'll get the picture immediately. I mean, in the very first chapter,
analogy, right,
you get this feeling that, holy cow, there's no way we can stop this. So I wanted to drive that point home, to kind of wipe away this notion, this fantasy notion. When you hear people say, "Oh, we're gonna knock abuse out," in the next X number of years, it's not going to happen. No. It's an impossibility. It's a statistical impossibility. Exactly. So I wanted to drive that point home, but at the same time, I wanted to show why that is so. And I talked about how early on we could have stopped this decades ago. We could have at least slowed the rage down of this burning inferno, this burning, and that's the metaphor that I used.
Yes.
So, one, it's unstoppable. But two, there's so much that we can do about it. And I wanted to really equip readers to not only have hope through our story, because it's not this fairy tale story where oh well, yeah, we reported our dad on I now research abuse in plain sight, and I train churches.
Feel easy type of story.
Yeah, I mean, our life is hard.
It's hard. Yes, all of that.
But there's so much hope in that, because there's so much that parents can be doing to protect their kids, and they don't know it.
Right.
And I think that's the big second point, if not the main point, that I wanted to drive home, is that there is so much that you can be doing right now. Overall, big picture, we're not going to stop abuse. No. We're just not. Evil is rampant. The numbers are going very fast in the wrong direction. Very fast in the wrong direction. Abuse is getting worse. It's not getting better. However, individually, there's so much that we can do, and it's not that hard. It's not that complicated to keep our kids safe.
And Jimmy is driving home a point that is so important for parents to grab hold of. As a parent, I didn't even know what abuse was, let alone know abuse within the home could happen. I really did not. I always thought if you kids had a problem or anything, you'd come tell me. Or, you tell me, you tell your dad. I never thought anything like this would happen. I was totally naive. So I think on an educational level, you did a masterful job of letting parents know, especially, that there is hope. And I appreciated that as a parent. As a grandparent, I appreciated that so much.
And there's some technical stuff in there too. There are a couple chapters that are a little bit technical. One having to do with, how abusers think, how they work, how they get away with abuse for so many decades undetected, because that's my research. That's what I do. But I talked to my editor early on, and I was like, I don't want to lose the effect and the fact that this is a memoir. Because when I do trainings, whether it's with the military or police departments or schools or churches, like I really focus on the technical side of, the nuts and bolts of how abuse happens, just to give people more tools in their tool belt so that they can better fight abuse and recognize it. So I didn't I didn't want to get so far into the technical side that it loses that feel that this, in the end, this book it's my story, you know,
it is
and
your story,
it's a memoir.
And I think you did such a beautiful job of weaving it all together. You gave us enough of the technical to know, hey, there are things we can do. There are things we should know. There are things that we can know, you know.
Yeah.
So, like I say, I think everyone's going to appreciate that. When you wrote the book, Jimmy, it's a memoir. Did you do this more for you, or did you do it with an audience in mind? And who was that audience?
I did not have myself in mind at all.
Okay.
Because, you know, some people write, it's a very cathartic thing to do, you know, to write for healing and, you know, as part of that healing journey. I didn't have that in mind, even in the back of my mind. That wasn't even a thought. I wanted to write, the reason I speak, the reason I train, the reason I do consultations with churches is because I want to help people get it right. I want to help people find answers. I want to help equip people to recognize abuse, to stop abuse that's already happening, one, and two, and more importantly, to intervene and stop patterns of abuse before full-on abuse happens on a child. So I really wanted to equip people, and parents specifically, parents, guardians, grandparents, caretakers, legal guardians, whoever fits in that category. I wanted to equip that group above all else to be able to protect the children who are in their care. That's what I had in mind.
And I appreciate that so much, because the struggles I've had and continue, I haven't resolved everything yet, obviously, as a mother of children who were abused, the grieving process continues on with me.
Yeah.
There are so many, if only I had known this, if only I had paid attention to this, if only, you know, someone would have said this, if only. Now I feel so much better equipped.
Yeah.
Thanks to the research mainly that you've done, and thanks to the exposing all that you did of the knowledge that you have. I think one of the things that people won't get a full understanding of from this book, and hopefully there will be future books to explain this, but you kept a relationship with your father after his arrest and incarceration enough that you actually wanted to get into his mind, into the mind of an abuser.
Yeah, that was one of my chapters, my obsession to get inside my father's head.
Yes. And you did that to the point of almost bringing ill health to yourself.
Yeah, it almost broke me.
Yes.
I mean, completely.
Yeah, it did.
Because it messes with your head on so many different levels. And
to hear the words from someone that you loved, that you cherished, as you shared in that first chapter, that you adored. He was your role model for ministry.
Yeah.
He was your spiritual guide. He was more than just a father. He was your everything. He is the reason you stand in front of a congregation and preach every week. He is the reason.
Yeah.
To hear from his mouth how he went about abusing children has had to cause a breaking within your heart that very few will ever understand. Very, very few. And I think you did an amazing job in telling that part of your story.
Yeah, and this is something that I didn't write in the book, but, you know, my last visit with him was, in-person visit was a couple years ago, and I haven't been back since. And, you know, our correspondence back and forth has dwindled to almost nothing. And it was because of that visit. Because that visit, out of any other visit, I went there specifically armed with questions, very specific questions. I wanted very specific answers. And that ended up being a 4-hour visit where he talked almost nonstop. And the amount of information that was revealed, and just the technicalities of how he thought and his thinking process and what was going through his mind. He didn't share specifics about what he did to the children, which I would have shut him down. I didn't want to hear it.
I was going to say, enough is enough is enough, right?
But right. From a research perspective, that visit was absolutely invaluable. And the, you know, I'll say this too. I had questions from Doctors Macknick and Martinez Conde, the neuroscientist who I've collaborated some with. I asked them, do you have any specific questions while I'm going to visit that you want me to ask
now,
as a scientist?
For those in our audience who don't exactly know who they are, explain what they do. They're more than neuroscience. Yeah. What do they do? How did they integrate some of their knowledge into abuse, in other words?
Yeah, I actually was the one who took their research and applied that to the world of abuse. And, you know, that's what got us talking to each other, because they said we never in a million years would have thought about this angle. And ironically, they had been approached before by other researchers about child sexual abuse. Now, so it was already on their radar.
Exactly.
And so they are neuroscientists who specialize in the science behind what your brain does visually when you see visual stimulus, and how your brain just makes up all these shortcuts.
How we translate that.
Yeah. And they've done,
here to here,
absolutely fantastic work. On the medical side, right. They've done groundbreaking work. So, you know, they had given me a list of questions, and they sent them back to me, and they're like, we would be really interested if you could ask your dad these questions. I brought those questions to him. The amount of information that I got, it absolutely, it's so hard to put into words. It was unprocessable. I did not have, and I mean, I hear stories of really horrific abuse every single day. And it's one of those things like a trauma surgeon, which we've talked about before. Exactly. Like they deal with trauma constantly.
Right.
They have trauma victims who come in, they work on them, they go home, they have a little mini meltdown maybe, and then they go on.
Right.
I couldn't do that with this. With this visit, learning just how methodic and calculated yes. and particular, and how every breath, every blink of the eye, everything was calculated. Everything.
Action. And Jimmy, I think it was this visit with your dad that began your investigation more deeply into abuse in clear sight.
Yeah, I don't know if it. Yeah. I think it just magnified the work that I had already done, because I had already done all kinds of stuff up to that point where I've been researching abuse in plain sight. I went back and looked at my blogs. I started writing about it almost immediately.
Yeah.
I started technically researching it maybe. I mean, I'm going to estimate maybe 2014. So I'd been doing work in this field for a while, but I think that was the linchpin that put everything together and said, holy cow, like this is far more, this goes way deeper than I ever thought. Right. This is so far more, I know that's horrible English. So much more calculated
than
every detail
than we would ever imagine.
There is no mistake.
I think it was that visit that shredded you. I remember.
Yeah, I was in a funk for a long time after that.
It was a long time. The brokenness from that visit of learning how calculated every move that an abuser makes is something that our human minds find hard to grasp.
Yeah.
Because we want to somehow think there is no one that can be that evil.
Yeah.
There is no one
and so we come up with all kinds of things like, well, maybe they struggle with lust. Maybe they fell into sin. Maybe maybe they had a
watched
lapse of
porn
judgment.
and they got off track. Or
Child sexual abuse is not that.
And I
Ever.
think, and we won't belabor on that, but I think in the book, Jimmy, your one chapter really focuses on that and gives us enough information that we get it to a point of just how calculated abusers are. And therefore the term, you came up with a term called abusers wolves. And then, and I won't go any further with that. I don't want to give too much away because I want our listeners to really read the book. A question I have that maybe a lot of our listeners have also is, where are you personally right now on your journey of healing? Because this, you brought it out. You didn't do it in a way to say, have sympathy on me. I've been broken. My dad was my hero, and now I had to turn my dad, or I chose. You chose to go to the police to turn your dad in when you found out about the abuse. But where are you now on this healing journey? Because it is a journey.
Yeah, that's a really difficult question to answer because, I've had all kinds of questions anywhere from, like, have you ever sought therapy? And the answer is no. It never even crossed my mind. Have you sought therapy for all the heavy things that you've learned and had to process and that you still deal with daily? Just the horrific stories, and not just hearing the stories, but from a consulting and training side, having to equip people to respond well when they find out all these horrific things. That takes such a tremendous emotional toll, and just always having to be on your feet, always having to be sharp, always having to have answers ready, and there is no checklist of answers. Like every situation is
bit different,
dramatically unique.
Yes.
So, always having to be on your game and be sharp and be careful what you say, how you say it, when you say it, if you say it, just always having to be on guard is one of the most exhausting things that I can't even put that into words.
Right.
So, where am I on that journey? Every day is a new day, and every day is unique. So I don't really have. I just don't have any kind of a scale because I don't think it exists to measure where you're at. Today I'm great. Today I'm fine. My kids are upstairs playing. It's their last day of virtual school. Tomorrow they go back to school, and we've been goofing off. And in between breaks, I go up and we laugh and goof around. Today's a great day. Tomorrow there could be something that comes across that is like a 2x4 to the back of the head that I never saw coming. And I'll pick myself back up and I'll go on. But, every day is different. So there's no continuum where I can say on average, I'm doing pretty good because it's so wild. It's a roller coaster ride.
I think what you've done that you may not realize how adequately you've done this, but over the years, and it's been several years now since we found out about your dad and since his incarceration, the trauma has had time to settle somewhat.
Yeah.
It's there. It always will be. And there are certain indicators that open it wide open again. But you've done something that we all need to do. You've lined up support along the way.
Yeah.
You have networked. You have made friends. You have shared innermost thoughts with others. You have bared your soul. And you have formed a support that is so strong right now that when the Jimmy Hinton we love, begins to topple, there's enough strength there from others to pull you back up.
Yeah.
And that's so important, I think, for abusers, victims of abuse, to understand that support is critical.
Yeah,
and people get it from different ways.
There's a caveat to that too, because it's this really interesting dynamic where there's not like specific point people. There's one, there's one person who, and I don't want to name or even hint who it is, but
Right.
Somebody here locally who
We
I'm,
always need a
very, very,
go-to.
very,
Right. We all
very
need
close
that.
to.
Right.
I mean, this guy, like, I could bear the innermost
Mm-hmm.
parts of my soul,
Right.
and this guy would be there to
Right.
pick me up. But that help comes through really bizarre and out of the box ways where it's not like I pick up the phone and I have a lifeline, because
No.
I don't have that.
No,
I don't
know.
have that.
No,
A lot of days I'm very lonely.
you're right that we don't just pick up the phone and say, hey Jimmy, help
Yeah.
me, I'm feeling bad. But the support is there in, you said it,
Yeah,
in
just being
odd
yeah.
and unusual
Yeah.
ways.
Just being networked with people,
Yes.
and even people, strangely, even people who contact me for help, which is about 99% of the emails and phone calls that I get.
Yeah.
Rare is it that I get a call where somebody's like, "Hey, let's just go hang out." It just doesn't happen
Yeah.
because of the nature of what we do.
What you do, right.
But even when people contact me and say, "Hey, I came across your website. I came across
Yep.
your blog, and now hopefully I came across your book,"
Right.
and it just really resonated with me.
Mm-hmm.
Those are times where I may not even know who the person is, but for me that's a huge source of healing, because
it
I'm
puts
like,
purpose
because
to
it
the pain.
right, because
It
it
does.
matters. It says that
yeah.
what we do, all the excruciating legwork that I've done over the years, that it matters, that it
matter,
helps
yeah.
people.
And that is a support. That's why at the beginning also of each of our podcasts, we thank our patrons.
Mm-hmm.
The support you give, both financially as well as emotionally, lifts.
Yeah.
It lifts.
Yeah.
Jimmy's heart. He always begins the podcast. We have a chat session before. Will tell me, well, I got an email and someone said something I read in your blog helped me, and I could almost see the light go on in you, like as if to say, it does matter,
Yeah.
and it does, Jimmy.
Yeah.
And we thank you
Yeah.
from the bottom of our hearts. We'll kind of bring this all together by saying thank you for sharing your personal life with us. That's not easy to do. I
No.
find that hard. We want to share the fun and the light things, but it's more difficult to open our hearts and share the brokenness.
Yeah.
And you've done that, but you've done that in such a way that you left us all with hope. And we appreciate that. Where can we get the book once it comes out?
Yeah,
here?
so it is in the actually, by the time of this podcast publishing, it should be available for pre-sale, but Amazon is probably the easiest place to find it.
Awesome.
I'm going to plug it certainly on the website, on my website, jimmyhinton.org. We'll plug it all over social media. We're definitely going to plug it hard. But yeah, as far as ordering and just having it available, both electronically, Kindle form, or, whatever other various forms, it's going to be across different platforms. So,
Awesome.
I'm not a Nook person, but what's Nook? Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
it'll be across
all different formats,
various platforms.
Wonderful.
So it'll be
Wonderful.
widely available. You can search for it. Just search for my name, Jimmy Hinton, and the book is The Devil Inside. You'll be able to find it.
We cannot wait. I appreciated so much reading the manuscript. I am changed by it. I understand more personally, more deeply your experience through this trauma. We appreciate you, Jimmy. We love you. We thank you. And we certainly pray over this book that the words within the book will reach out and touch those who are genuinely in need of it.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, I guess I'll let you leave people with the truth bomb so that they can be inspired today.
Okay, the truth bomb I would have for today is Trauma is hard, abuse is messy, but when you do the right thing, good always comes from it.
Yeah.
And I'll leave you all with that.
Very good. Well, to our listeners, thank you for tuning into this episode, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.